Welcome. I am Pam Ireland, and I'm one of the 2 nursery managers at Long Island Native Plant Initiative. And I am thrilled to be here. And this is actually a wonderful presentation moderating this next session on restoration and native plants, close to everyone's heart that is in this room. So more and more land managers and homeowners are embracing the restoration projects and planting more natives. It isn't always easy, but taking on the challenges proves worthwhile. And increasing biodiversity and resilience in our communities. If you're looking to receive continuing education and credits, please make sure that you have signed in and out of each session. In this session, we're very pleased to learn more about restoration and native plants through our presentations from Alexis Doshas, Shelby Miller, Alexandra Roldos, and Victor Azzaretto. So first, we would like to welcome Alexis Doshas as she's presenting about native lawns alternatives. Alexis is a graduate of the Environmental Studies Department of Antioch University, New England, and a concentration of conservation biology. Her path with plants includes running a small organic gardening business, working on restoration projects on Cape Cod. So she's bringing in a little bit of the northern climate and leading field research on the effects and mitigation of chronic atmospheric deposition of nitrogen on the heathland communities of Cape Cod. Currently, Alexis is the nursery manager of Native Plant Trust Nasami Farm, where they grow thousands of native plants from wild ecotypic seeds to ensure genetic diversity and resiliency in our landscapes, and where she teaches classes on the propagation in native plants and soil, and she will be running our workshop tomorrow. So I hope you're all coming. Please welcome Alexis.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you for having me here. And it is true that I'm from the north. And I work for Native Plant Trust. Make sure, there we go. If you're not familiar with us, we're one of the country's oldest native plant or plant conservation organizations, and the one solely representing plants of the Northeast in New England. We really want to promote the conservation and the use of our native flora to support resilient landscapes and biodiversity in our landscapes. And so my talk today is on native lawn alternatives, and I'm going to talk a bit about our lawns in general, because this is something much like Shanae was talking about, and the theme that's been running through this whole symposium is really about us being responsible and being connected and being stewards of the lands that we either own or manage, or maybe your favorite park that you go to, that urban site that you can maybe volunteer at and work on. And so it's really about kind of taking that responsibility and finding that joy and bringing in that biodiversity that's going to encourage a functioning ecosystem that we are all a part of. So this is a photograph of a garden in the woods, which is a botanic garden in Framingham, Massachusetts. And this was a native lawn example installation. And we'll be talking about, I'm going to talk a little bit about lawns in general, the idea of our lawns and what they require from us. And then we'll talk about ways we can use native plants instead of the lawns. I'll do some real practical techniques, and then we'll highlight some native plants. So this is going to be really much more about ecological gardening, and I'm talking a lot more about native plants than invasive management. Okay. So the lawn ideal. American history with lawns. We really love them. We put them everywhere. And they are useful. Lawns are very useful. They allow us to recreate. Our kids can play on them. Our dogs can play. We can do sporting events on them. So there is good reasons to have lawns. Do we need this much lawn? Is the question, right? And I once saw Claudia West speak. I don't know if you're familiar with her from North Creek, and she put out a great book about rewilding. And she had said over in Germany, she had read all about the North American prairies and was so excited to come and see. And when she got here, she just saw lawn after lawn, and how disheartening it was to her when she knew about all of our North American native plants. And there was another reason that, when we were pioneering, and the colonists were here and they were pioneering and moving out west, it was very helpful to have these huge areas around our settlements and our homes to see if any we were going to be attacked by any way, or or any wild animals coming at you. So you really cleared out these areas, and it's really kind of stuck with us. And then, of course, it is kind of the default. If a subdivision goes up, the default setting is a green lawn. And then if you are planting it, you're the odd person out, because now you have, it's not, keeping up with the Joneses, et cetera. So we really need to change this paradigm. And I just read a great article about calling it an undergrown yard instead of an overgrown yard. When we talk about like, oh, that neighbor's yard is so overgrown. No, actually, these are undergrown. These are not helping anything here. You're not going to find insects. You're not going to find, wildlife in these environments. And we know this, right? So what can we be doing? How can we start to work to get away from that? So the dirt on lawns. I'm sorry, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer if you all enjoy your lawns, but we have 40 plus million acres of lawns in the US. It's about the size of New England. $40 billion a year spent on lawn care. It's a lot of money. It's labor intensive. We spend about 70 hours a year on average maintaining our lawns. And they're very resource heavy. They require fossil fuels if you're using lawnmowers, and fertilizers, require pesticides to keep the crabgrasses out, and a lot of water. And so here in our region in the Northeast, the lawns are made of European grasses, cool season grasses, that are always going to require fertilizer and inputs and tons of water to look this way here in our climate. So it can never be, there are companies and ways to do organic lawn care, but it's always going to require a lot of amendments and a lot of management. So here is a percent total of the land area covered by turf grass. See a lot more of it happening in our neck of the woods over here. And again, the EPA says 30,000 tons a year of pesticides are used to maintain those lawns, about 5 to 7 pounds an acre of a typical lawn taken from UMass. And, then you see these signs saying, you can't have your kids, your dogs playing on the lawn because they're being treated. And isn't that the whole point of us having the lawns? So, really kind of be thinking about that. And also with a changing climate, we're seeing increased precipitation in the Northeast. We're seeing really amounts and intensity of more in the winter precipitation, more as rain. We've seen extended periods of droughts. All of this is going to make maintaining that lawn that much more difficult. So we can really, really start thinking about other ways. Ooh. I'm back there. Ooh. Going too fast. There you go. So why the native plant lawn alternative? This is a field at the farm that I work at, and we mow it down. Oh, unfortunately, not often enough, but maybe once every 2 or 3 years. And we get these great bobolink habitat now. And each year it's a joy to go out there and see them. They're ground nesting birds. They want to have this open meadow, but with plenty of native plants for food sources. A little colonia up there with a little bumblebee. We want to be supporting. We want to be contributing to the ecological health of our landscapes and our and being a steward. And they're just beautiful, really true. So I want to talk a little bit about some elegant solutions for removing your existing turf lawn, because I have spent I've spent too many years pulling up turf lawns, which, you know, it's one thing is they have very, very shallow roots. Right? So you can get under there and kind of pull it up like a carpet, unlike the Lespereza with the taproot that we were just hearing about, but it's still pretty labor intensive and you're really disturbing the soil, and it takes a long time. Some options are shrinking your lawn. So I always encourage, especially if you're a designer or you know, a landscape professional and you're working with clients, start slow. Trying to convince somebody to give up their lawn can be hard. So really think of areas where you can shrink the lawns, like along the edges of the yard, under trees. You know, you can mow paths and just let it go. Like if you have a slope, it's a very nice spot to put in your first gardens, because you don't want to have to mow that. It's, you know, the mower kind of tips over and they're hard to maintain. Hell strips, that area between the sidewalk and the road, are really great opportunities to plant up with really tough native plants that can handle that. This is one of my place that I lived in. It had a really kind of rolling slope, and so I didn't want to have to keep dealing with it, so I just slowly kept adding plants to it, and I had this beautiful garden by the end of it. Not all native, but so some of the options for killing your lawn, if you've now been convinced that you should start thinking about removing some of your lawn, you can do chemical application. This is the most efficient, or is the quickest and probably most efficient, but it's also obviously the most detrimental to your groundwater source and soil life as well. And I would say out here on Long Island, you probably, much like on the Cape where I lived for many years, have a very low water table, or very high water table. So not using pesticides or herbicides is very good choice. Solarization, you can take a clear plastic. This is a photo from the garden at Garden in the Woods, and they were creating a meadow. So they used a clear plastic and dug it in. You just have to, much like they were just talking about, you really have to watch those edges, you know, bury your edges in to make sure that no light or water, or not light, but any water is getting in there. And you're really smothering, but also using the UV to kind of bake the seed bank. So you're going to kill off that weed seed. That takes probably a good 4 to 5 months to be really good. But you are also damaging your soil biota, and you'll have to kind of do some restoring, but that's the one downfall. As I talked about earlier, you can do mechanical removal. There's actually sod cutters, if any of you have used one of those. I have not. I've mostly done the shovel and kind of grit it out and pull it up. It's time consuming, it's backbreaking, but if it's for a small area, it gets the job done. And it's you know, at least you're not going to be harming any of your soil life, though you are going to be removing some soil that is in the roots there. You can do the do nothing, which, right, is kind of nice to think about. The do nothing is just don't mow and see what comes up. And I have a colleague down in Connecticut. She's been doing a lot of meadow restoration, and she's been trying to do a bit more of the do nothing. She used to preach the clearing, you know, the zeroing out of the site. But if you can if it's a small enough area, you can try do nothing, see what comes up. You're going to have to go out there, and I call it curating, pull out the things you don't want. If you have an invasive popping up, or you know, and then obviously keep the woodies down. But you may start seeing natives popping up. You could also then seed or put in some plugs of native plants, which is a very economical way to go, to kind of start to encourage that to happen. And then to kind of create some of that form, because I think what a lot of what scares people about kind of going, kind of letting things go, as we say, is having it look messy. So you can really make it look a little neater by putting nice paths in, making them look really intentional. And then people can say, oh, they're doing that on purpose. Oh, you put up a sign, and this is my pollinator garden, right? So this is what I'm doing. That could be really helpful. And then sheet mulching, which is one of my favorites. I'm a soil nerd, so I love the soil food web, and I always want to keep it as intact and restore it. And so I found that sheet mulching works really well. It's a principle of permaculture. If you look it up, you can really go down the rabbit hole. There's lots of different ways to do it. If you're doing it for more of a agricultural or for a garden, you may do the sheet mulching layered, so the lasagna layering, by adding a whole bunch of amendments on top of your smothering material. But if you're just going to be putting native plants down and just going to be killing turf grass, plain cardboard works wonders. The one thing about, and I'll show you a case study. This is our intern a number of years back. We had a grassy circle in our parking lot with a couple of oaks. And, here we are, a native plant nursery, and we were like, we got to get rid of this turf. And we wanted to showcase some native lawn alternatives. So our intern, Shannon, took this on as her project. And so we got a lot of cardboard. And you really want to layer it out, if you saw there in the previous one. You want to layer it out, and you want to make sure it's very much overlapping, because any light will allow that grass to keep growing. Wet it down to hold it in place. You want to take any tape, whatnot, off of it. And for Shannon's project, we only had like one season. So we brought in some loam from a local organic composter nearby to kind of speed up that process. But you could just do the cardboard and cover it with leaves. Are a really nice thing to do. We actually brought leaves in on top of that loam and kind of help build that layers and fertility. And you could use straw as well, or something, if you didn't want the look of the cardboard. And then after about 3 or 4 months, that happened in, say, May and June. We were planting in September with the help of a lot of volunteers. Because we're a nursery, we could grow the plugs for this project. But we kind of, watched the site, and Shannon made a design for where the the different patches of native plants were going to go, and we planted right into that cardboard. So you want to give it about 3 to 4 months if you can do it in the fall, and not plant until the spring, or do it real early in the spring now and maybe plant late June, because you want to make sure you're killing off that grass. But you can plant right into the cardboard, and that's really nice. So you haven't really disturbed your soil, and you don't have to do all that manual labor of removing. And so this is our lawn alternative bed after the following spring, the first year. Looking great, right? Ooh. So now I'm gonna say what species work well for lawn alternatives, Alexis? Maybe you all know, maybe I'm preaching to the choir here about getting rid of your lawns, and you're familiar with your native species to use, but I'm going to run through a few just to let you know. Some of the ones we've been using a lot of lately and really nice. I started to include prunella and the next one, because they are pretty much existing in your lawn right now. Prunella vulgaris, or self-heal. It's in the mint family. It's very low growing, 4 to 20 inches, sun to part shade. If the whole no mow movement really kind of brought this plant into into view because it is existing in a lot of turf lawns. And so I was seeing in May, as I drove around and noticed people that weren't mowing their lawns, they'd have a whole bunch of prunella. It's very nice. Also a medicinal plant, hence the self-heal, but aren't most of them, right? Very good. It's a very good pollinator plant because it has that early bloom time. It blooms most of the year. It'll do repeat blooms, but it really helps in the spring. Same with our next species. Sorry. It's a little delay. There we go. Erigeron vocalis, or robin's fleabane, plantain fleabane. This is actually one of my neighbors who didn't mow for May. And you can see they put a little path in, but everything in their lawn turned to Erigeron. And again, super early bloom. It's very helpful for our pollinators. You know, there's a lot of talk about leaving the dandelions for the pollinators. Well, if you just don't mow, you'll be helping. 8 to 24 inches full sun. It's really good for average and dry soil. So really good for the soils down here. Really beautiful. Doesn't get tall like a lot of the other fleabanes, and really pretty when it grows en masse. Now, for more of your grass-like turf lawn species, we have the carex. And I know Mount Cuba recently put out a nice booklet and study about a lot of different carex species for lawn alternatives. The one that we get the most request for is Carex pennsylvanica, Pennsylvania sedge, and this is because it grows rhizomatously like a lawn, so it will really fill in. It grows about 6 to 10 inches, sun to shade, average dry soil, and this can be used to replace your lawn. You can also mow it like once a year, keep it down, or twice a year if you're really, but I wouldn't, I wouldn't shorn it. I wouldn't go too deep and hurt the crown. But this is one that if you're working with clients, and it's kind of a good place to start because it looks the most like a lawn. It can be used like a lawn. We also have Carex appalachica, Appalachian sedge, 8 to 10 inches. This is a clumping grass. So you got to bunch them together, sun to part shade, average to dry soil. It has a kind of a finer leaf than the Carex pennsylvanica, a little graceful, really nice species, also quite popular. Eragrostis spectabilis. This is used a lot on the roadsides and highway departments. It's really drought tolerant, very low growing, and in the late summer has these beautiful blooms, look like a purple haze when they're blooming. When you're driving down the highway, you'll see them. And it's used that way because then they don't have to mow, because it is a shorter grass, and a very nice pollinator plant for that late summer. I really like purple lovegrass. Dischamsa flexuosa, I'm sure you're familiar with. It's one of the grassland heathland species, wavy hair grass. It has kind of green spiky foliage, and then the plumes of this beautiful golden florets in the fall that can be quite persistent into the winter, which is really nice and beautiful. A little bit taller, maybe a bit more of an accent plant, or if you're doing more of a meadow, and it can handle a little bit of shade. Also, a lot of these are, because they're native plants, they can handle nutrient poor situations pretty well, especially when there's a little blue stem. I'm sure we're all quite familiar with little blue stem, but it is a power horse. It's used also a lot on the sides of highways because it can handle salt tolerant. It is used a lot in grassland restoration projects. It is a little bit taller, 1 to 4 feet, and clumps. And then in the fall, it has that, it's kind of in the blue-red range on the leaf foliage, and has these beautiful plumes of seed heads in the fall. A very nice plant, especially out in these conditions. Fragaria virginiana, we were talking about the wild strawberries earlier. again, this is something that will probably show up if it's not already in your yards and in your lawns. It's very aggressive. It's a very what's the word? Yeah, I like to call them aggressive natives as opposed to weedy. But so it's good for a place where you don't want, if you have a slope or you have a really dry, sun-baked area that you don't really get to very much for watering, I would suggest Fragaria. It will really fill in, kind of mat-like. And if it's a sunny enough spot, you'll get a whole bunch of strawberries, right? And so they are small and sweet, and loved by and cherished by all wildlife as well as humans. So I think it's a really nice one, but doesn't play well with other perennials. You could certainly do it under some woodies, but it might outcompete other ground covers. Not too fast. Subaldiopsis tridentata, a 3-tooth cinquefoil, also a very nice ground cover. It has kind of that glossy evergreen leaf, or semi-evergreen, I should say. Maybe down here, it probably sticks around a little longer. It also does that kind of nice matte forming cover. It has a nice white flower. Very low to the ground. So this is really nice in those areas, very tolerant of shallow soils and very dry soils and sun. So it's a nice choice. And then blue-eyed grass, or Ciceranchium angustifolium. There are a few other Ciceranchium species as well, which is really beautiful because it looks just like in the iris family. It looks just like a grass until the bloom. It's an early spring bloomer as well. Beautiful blue flowers. And sun to part shade, average to wet soil. So it's good for a wet meadow if you have a wet meadow. We really enjoy using that, and the birds, the bees love it. Sedum trinatum, or stone crop. You're probably pretty familiar with your sedums. They are 4 to 8 inches. They spread 8 to 12, and they can really fill in again. Really good for average to dry soils. We used it on that lawn alternative bed. We used it along the edges where it gets really sandy by the driveway edge. So maybe along a driveway edge would be nice, or a stone wall or a stone garden would be a really nice spot. Sedums are also, very easy to propagate as well. So they'll spread pretty easily if they break off. Don't worry. And then the pussy toes, which I love, and they're always kind of thought of as these like roadside weeds, but they're really beautiful. And when grown en masse, they can really create a beautiful carpet of silvery, fuzzy foliage. And so we have Antinaria neglecta and Antinaria plantaginifolia, which has a larger leaf over here. And they put up fluffy little blooms in the spring that are reminiscent of cat's paws. And this is the host plant for the American lady. And so it was, just growing them. Again, it's encouraging that connection and that a life to come into your spaces. And so we had seed flats of them in the greenhouse, and all of a sudden they started getting all curled up and webbed, and we were like, and it's like if you plant it, they will come. And so these American ladies had laid their eggs in our seed flats, and we hatched out a whole bunch of caterpillars, and it happens every year on the lawn alternative bed. So it's just a way for you to know that you are supporting and having that reciprocity with other life. I have, not only is it beautiful for me, but it is, contributing to a functioning ecosystem. It's contributing to other life, and that feels really good. And then you have these beautiful animals and critters to interact and support. That feels great. Bearberry, or kinnikinnick, Arctostophilus uva ursi. We have a whole bunch of it. I meant to look to see whether it is around here. Is it around on Long Island? Yes, yeah. I would assume it would be. Working out on the Cape, it was everywhere. And it's another one of those workhorses. It's a subshrub, so it's a woody. and really can handle super dry soil and lots of sun. Produces that red berry, which is in the manzanita family. A little tart for us, but wildlife, bears love it, hence the bearberry name. And whenever anybody tells me they have like a really difficult site that they don't want to deal with, like a hot sunny slope, I always recommend bearberry because it also has evergreen, so it keeps that lovely color throughout the year. Really nice plant. Going too fast, sorry. And then if you have some shady spots, I wanted to encourage you. Here at the garden in the woods, they have huge swaths of tiarella and woodland phlox, which planted together look really, really nice. Tiarella cordifolia is kind of one of those go-to shade plants that I would recommend. Can grow very mat-like in the forest, especially moist, likes a little moisture. We do have it in a spot in our lawn alternative bed on which isn't really moist soil, but it's hanging in there. It's doing good. Beautiful white foam flowers in the spring as well, pretty early in the spring. So that's very helpful again for our pollinators. And then again, the wild blue phlox, which is just beautiful, planted with the tiarella, and also in the evening, the blue phlox is just like glows. It's a really nice plant for our pollinators. That is probably not going to fill in your entire yard, but so I would use them together for sure. And then another one of my favorites is the wild ginger, Asarum canadense. And it's just a beautiful heart-shaped leaf, creates, a mat, has this incredible, so archaic flower that you have to get down on the ground to see. So I always like to think of, who is this flowering for? Is it like a slug and an ant, or like, because you've got to really get down there to look at this incredible bloom. But that's also kind of a sun part shade, wet to average species. It can be used like, it is not in the ginger family, but the root does have a little bit of that similar flavor to it. And then I would be remiss not to include some wood ferns. Marginal wood ferns. I mean, well, you can use all kinds of ferns, but I love the marginal wood fern for its texture. 8 to 24 inches, sun to shade, average to dry. Ferns can be a really nice ground cover if you've got a woodland area that you're working with, or a shadier area. Consider the ferns. They're beautiful. All right, I think that's it. And then I was gonna plug for, we have a plant finder on our website that you can kind of put in your conditions, and it spits you out some options for native plants. And that's it. Thank you. And I'll take any questions. Yeah.
Hi, what do you say to people that say they need lawns for their kids and also they don't want to get ticks?
Right. Well, you can incorporate the lawn. There can be an area of lawn. I just don't think, like that's why I said, like, I always start with like shrinking the lawn. So, there could certainly be like, how much lawn do they need to play? And you could start playing with that idea of like, a 10 by 12, or, like what area, and then where are the other areas that we can turn into the native plantings. So like I said, along your driveway, or along the fence line, or along a slope that nobody's going to be playing on. Ticks is a little tougher. Ticks like leaves. We love leaves. Leaves are really important. So, but I just think using kind of targeting some of those areas that don't get used would probably be a good way to start. And then if you're bringing in, wildlife that will eat your ticks, then yay.
I hope this gives everybody lots of ideas about when they get home, and all of a sudden they can start looking at that lawn with a little different eye and think, okay, we got some great options for how we can get more native plants in there. So that was terrific. And we will have lots more from Alexis tomorrow. So there is a slight little update if you have a printed program that you're looking at. Yvette Weaver is not able to speak. She has just accepted we congratulate her. She's been selected as a Longwood Fellow for a 13-month program in leader development at Longwood Gardens, focusing on public horticulture, and we are wishing her all the best. However, we have a great stand-in, but equally passionate horticulturalist from the Highline. So I'd like to introduce Shelby Miller, and she's going to share her work at the Highline in New York City, and it is called Wild Design. And Shelby is a horticulturalist specializing in ecological horticulture and native perennial gardens. She's a graduate of CUNY and NYBG ornamental horticulture program, where she specialized in native plants and ecological restoration. Shelby was the 2022 Horticulture Fellow on Governor's Island, where she focused on the design and implementation of an urban forest renovation project in Hammock Grove. Shelby is currently a horticulturalist on the Highline, one of my favorite spots to visit in New York, and where she manages the Hudson River Overlook and Sun Deck at 14th Street. Welcome, Shelby.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's truly an honor to be in the room full of native plant nerds and restoration technicians. So thank you so much. So this is me. I am currently the zone horticulturalist at the Highline for the Sun Deck and Hudson River Overlook at 14th Street. Today, I'm going to be talking a bit about the work that I do there, and mostly I'll be presenting a series of observations and some questions about gardening with native plants, specifically in the urban landscape. Some of these questions are, how do we as gardeners address the challenges of urban settings like pollution and increasingly more unpredictable weather patterns? How do we maximize the potential of urban gardens as spaces for supporting biodiversity? And what role do native plants play in all of this? As one example of the many public green space projects of the last century, the Highline is a really great example and an interesting case study for the impact of naturalistic and ecological garden design, both in New York City and more broadly. So I'd like to start by providing some historical context and take a step back in time to look at the ways in which the landscape in which I garden today has changed due to colonization, industrialization, and urbanization. So some of you may be familiar with this image, and it really sticks with me, but this is an image that came out in the New York Times recently, depicting the island of Manhattan in 1609 versus an aerial shot of the island of Manhattan in 2006. So the image on the left is a land pre-colonization, pre-industrialization, pre-urbanization. This is the land of the Munsee, Lenape, and Mohican peoples. This was a landscape of wetlands and forests. When we look at the Hudson River specifically, there's an extraordinary diversity of fish, plant, and animal life that made this island a really integral location for the people that inhabited this land, and later the European colonizers of the 17th century that would develop the land for commercial and residential use, mostly filling the wetlands with debris and then paving it over to create the city we know today as Manhattan. So by the 1830s, the Hudson River had really become the country's most vital transportation thoroughfare, seeing the transport of goods like furs and fruit from all around the world entering through New York and moving through the New York and Harlem Railroad, which ran down the west side of Lower Manhattan. I really love this image on the left depicting the West Side Cowboys, and anyone who doesn't know this image, the story about this is that the city put out a mandate in the 1850s declaring that there needed to be an employed person to ride in front of the trains as they passed through Lower Manhattan because there were so many injuries and deaths from the rail line that ran on street level. And so the West Side Cowboys used to run in front of the trains with red flags to warn the pedestrians that the train was oncoming. Still, by the 1920s, this was a hazard. And so there was a plan made to create an elevated rail line, which we can see on the right. Companies with some foresight decided to build their factories and warehouses along the proposed line. And if you can see over in that image on the right, they created loading docks that opened out onto the tracks. And we still have many of those today, which we call passageways. The trains on the Highline ran between 1934 through the 1980s. And then there was the rise of interstate trucking and air travel, which caused a decline in rail. And so by the 90s or by the 80s, trains had stopped running on the Highline. If we fast forward to 1999, this was the state of the Highline. It had been abandoned for the better part of 2 decades, and vegetation had started rewilding the old rail tracks. By this time, the Highline was inhabited by a mix of early succession species, both native and non-native, all adapted to these specific urban conditions. There were roses, dandelions, Virginia creeper, cherry trees, ailanthus trees. There were meadows of Queen Anne's lace. And I want to note here that the soil, for lack of a better word, was a very shallow layer of organic matter that accumulated between the rail tracks and gravel on this site. And so this is a very, very challenging location. And these are some of my favorite images of the Highline. There was absolutely no irrigation, obviously, and there was relatively little to no human interaction, aside from the few New Yorkers who put up ladders to access the space, decorating trees and putting up little tiny gardens. In 1999, our founders, Robert Hammond and Joshua David, met at a community board planning meeting about the future of this defunct railroad that they had really no idea about. And the two became close friends and ended up founding the Friends of the Highline, which is the nonprofit organization that I work for today. Part of their campaign to save the Highline from destruction involved hiring photographer Joel Sternfeld to take these images, this one, the one before, and a series of others over the course of 1 year, capturing the state of the abandoned rail track and really presenting these evocative images as a way to garner public support for saving this space. And they opened up a call for proposals. One of those proposals came from field operations with Scofidio and Renfro, and a planting plan from the Dutch plantsman Piet Oudolf. So Piet was recently regarded by the New York Times as the greatest living gardener, and he is our plantsman. He had a long history in the nursery trade and as a landscape designer in Europe. He had done a few projects in North America prior to the Highline, including Battery Park in New York City and the Lurie Gardens in Chicago. Mostly what Piet introduced to landscape design on a global scale was the naturalistic garden. And some of those principles involve matrix, block, and scatter planting for anyone who's into landscape design. He really emphasized the 4-season garden, introduced this idea of the 5th season, leaving seed heads in the field, not cutting back over the winter, not putting our gardens to bed, but instead leaving those. We've actually just started our spring cutback, so you'll also have to forgive my tired eyes. We've been doing that all week. But Piet really chooses plants in his landscapes for their unique foliage, color, shape, and texture. These are some samples of his drawings for the Highline. This one is showing the Eastern Rail Yard at 30th Street, which was the 3rd section of the Highline to open. And this is really emblematic of his style and shows how, in this particular setting, he's drawing inspiration from the rewilded landscape of the Highline that we saw in those images from Joel Sternfeld. His gardens really pay respect to some of the natural landscapes of the region, such as the wetland planting in my section at the Sun Deck and the wildflower fields at 28th Street, which are made up mostly of New York native plants. I really love this comparison. So the first section of the Highline opened in 2009, and that was spanning Gansevoort to 17th Street. There are 3 main sections today spanning Gansevoort to 34th Street. The park is subdivided into several thematic garden zones, and we manage the space as a team of 10 full-time horticulturists, 3 seasonal gardeners, and a team of lovely volunteers, some of whom have been with us since the very first year that the Highline opened. All sections of the Highline vary thematically from woodland to grassland to thicket to wildflower field, each of these really immersing visitors in specific microclimates that are adapted to changing conditions in this urban setting. And I'll touch more on that in just a moment. But a key component of Pete's design were North American native plants, some of which are cultivars. The original planting plan was 60% non-native or native cultivars to 40% native plants. Today, the proportion of native plants is higher due to additions from the horticulture team over the last 15 years in collaboration with Pete. And as of 2022, in our last plant audit, we had 166 species that were native to North America. 127 of those were native to the New York region. A few that I wanted to highlight for you all, Long Island folks, are some of the Long Island natives that we have. We do have the Eupatorium hisabifolium. We have a couple different Asclepias, the milkweeds, junipers, Panicum virgatum, and little blue stem, of course. And in terms of cultivars of native plants, I will say that we are a very, very ornamental garden. And so we find that the longer bloom times and larger, possibly more showy flowers of cultivars are preferable in our setting over the straight species. And we do have very high levels of visitorship throughout the year. And so we find that it's often necessary to have a combination of both native and cultivars of natives in order to provide that year-round interest and maintain our very ornamental garden aesthetic. And thanks to Pete's emphasis on the 5th season, we also have a spectacular winter show and tons of seed heads in the garden, which have incredible aesthetic appeal, and then also provide vital resources for wildlife throughout that winter season. And as a post-industrial site, the Highline is also incredibly a host to a large range of species year-round, including migratory fauna. Yeah, I was hoping for that reaction. So each year, we as gardeners are witness to a vast number of birds and bats. Sadly, part of this witnessing also involves the acknowledgement of the detrimental impacts of urban living, with dozens of birds, and I'll say dozens, that's on probably the lower end of the spectrum, losing their lives from hitting surrounding buildings on the Highline. And we are also witnessing the rapid decline of certain endangered species, such as monarchs. So as gardeners in this environment, we're tasked with finding solutions when we're able to, and altering our horticultural practices to be more ecologically focused. This year, we were working on adding more shelter for hibernating eastern redbats after we discovered a few hibernating in our gardens. So we hope to provide at least 3 new structures for them next year. We are also home to a variety of insects. Many of them are native to the region, who use the Highline as a connector between green spaces or as their permanent home. In 2017, the horticultural team at the Highline worked with Sarah Kornbluth and Corey Smith of the American Museum of Natural History to conduct a study of bees on the park. This is a lot of numbers, but basically what they discovered is that after collecting about 250 bees over a 6-month period, they found members of 4 of the 6 families of bees known to inhabit New York City. And I believe that with the entire 6 families, there are about 400 or more species of bees. And we had 4 of the 6 families present on the Highline. Most of those were generalists, but 11% of those collected bees were specialists that utilize plants in the aster family. So that emphasized for us the need as a horticultural team to make sure that those numbers were maintained, and that we could also add more native plants to our gardens that might support a wider range of specialists on the park. So as I briefly mentioned, there are several challenges to working in a post-industrial landscape. As you can see from this photo, we work in a very, very narrow space. Our total garden bed is about 1.5 miles long, but quite narrow. On the Highline, we face high levels of pollution, drought, high winds, temperatures that are 5 degrees plus or minus what you'd feel on the street level, and the impact of invasive flora and fauna. We have incredibly shallow soil depth in what is essentially 1.5 miles long container garden. We have also experienced changing light conditions on the Highline due to the construction of new buildings since we opened in 2009. Those buildings also cast really strong beams of light onto certain areas of our bed, which make planting really challenging. One example I wanted to give was of the Chelsea grasslands, which recently underwent a redesign in the southern portion after scaffolding and a new building went up and essentially shaded out that full sun garden. And so last year, that section was redesigned as an oak grove in response to that new environment. This is my team. So as a team, we use a variety of ecologically driven practices and techniques in maintaining our gardens. The team is, as I mentioned, currently in the middle of our spring cutback, which as a 5-season garden means that our plants have stayed in the landscape through winter for wildlife to utilize. We also don't use any chemical pesticides, insecticides, or herbicides. At times, I believe we've deployed biological controls, but for the most part, we're manually removing pests and focusing on improving cultural conditions on the park. We currently are expanding our propagation program, and Joe Conlon, who's with me here today, has been working on that project at 34th Street. So we hope to have a stronger propagation program specifically for native plants on the Highline. We also have composting partnerships with Earth Matter and Big Reuse, who process our debris and move compost and provide compost for our beds. I also wanted to highlight some of the recent programming that we've done. Last year in 2023, our horticulture celebration was entitled Keep It Wild. We highlighted New York native plants on the Highline and had a bunch of really amazing signage and programming on the park to discuss some of the New York native plants that we have. Last year, we also nominated butterfly milkweed Asclepias tuberosa for the New York City Wildflower Competition, and we won. So that's exciting. Thanks. New sections are also being added to the Highline. Last year, the Moynihan Connector was added, which is a new woodland planting. And we also have our first street level portion of the Highline being added at 18th Street. The Western Rail Yard, which is the last remaining kind of preserved section of the Highline, is currently undergoing construction, but it should be opening back up in the next year or two. So as a garden, we're deeply committed to community partnerships and programming. We have several educational opportunities specific to horticulture. We have a teen horticulture pathway for local high school students, and they come out to the field and work with us. We have programming for visiting school groups and horticulture tours for the public. And as a highly diversified urban green space, we have this amazing opportunity to engage the public with a variety of native plants in particular, and really unique native plant communities and a diversity of wildlife that inhabit the park because of those plant communities. We are really eager to expand our programming in the next coming years. And we do have Pete Udolph, our designer, coming back for a garden consultation, and he will be giving a public talk on the Highline in June. So please stay tuned for that. In a larger sense, the preservation of the Highline as a public garden is part of a larger trend in reimagining public green spaces. We're part of the Highline Network, which is the map that I provided here. It's a little blown out, but you get the gist. We can see a ripple effect across North America. Each of these projects, and there are so many, but they really are highly site-specific. And while we contend with the effects of ongoing urbanization, preservation of our natural areas is more crucial than ever. I'm sure we all think about this. But I think that the repurposing of industrial sites is also a really great opportunity to explore the potential of native plants to adapt to these harsh environments, and our ability to kind of study the ways in which these native plants can inform decisions for approaching this kind of urbanization pathway that we seem to be on as a nation. In the private sector, we can also see the effect of naturalistic and ecological landscape design. I think that designers like Claudia West and Thomas Rainier of Fido Studios, Larry Weiner, Kelly Norris, Benjamin Vogt are all part of this larger movement of pushing naturalistic gardening and ecologically focused gardening aesthetics and consciousness to the public. The focus on designing spaces that are functioning ecosystems is really making its way into mainstream consciousness. And it's just a really exciting time to be a horticulturist. In our industries, we can also see the relationship between landscape architects, ecologists, horticulturists, preservationists, botanists, and land stewards growing stronger and more unified in protecting our natural resources and being multifaceted in our approaches to the ongoing climate crises. So I'd like to zoom back in now to the space that I steward. This is the Sun Deck and the Hudson River Overlook, a little part of it. This was last fall. So we've got some really gorgeous fall color going on with the asters and sumac in my section. My section is primarily an early forest sumac grove with an understory of native grasses like little bluestem, herbaceous perennials like Joe Pye, mountain mint, asters. There's a wetland planting that runs through the center of this space, made up primarily of North American native wetland plants, including some of my favorites, the swamp mallow hibiscus and milkweed. There's the swamp mallow. Over the last 15 years, since the Sun Deck was planted out, there's been a large loss of species diversity and the acceleration of sumac life cycles due to harsh conditions on the Highline. There are several projects that I'll be working on this year to increase species diversity. I'm going to be adding numbers of new native plants, rethinking plant communities in this space. The wetland planting is going to be completely renovated this year. And I think as I stand in my section, looking out at the Hudson from one of the last remaining open vantage points to the Hudson, I can really feel connected to everything that this space was, everything that it is, and everything that it can be. And I think that it's a really beautiful opportunity as a horticulturist to feel this connection to place in a highly changed environment. And I think that when we go back to how I began this talk, thinking about the history of place, that's something that I really want to sink into as a horticulturist, thinking about the ways in which we use plants that were native to this environment and the ways in which this place has rapidly changed, the ways that this climate is no longer what it was, but seeing the ways in which native plants are incredibly resilient, the ways that they have adapted, and the ways that they can help us to face all of the changes that we're experiencing. It's a really beautiful moment, and there's so many things to learn in my garden, and so I feel so privileged to stand here and be able to look out on the Hudson every day. And that's all from me, so thank you.
That was
I
a
know.
wonderful presentation. And I have to admit, the Highline is, anyone who's coming to New York, that's their first stop. They will all go, and they're right off the plane from JFK. They will head to the Highline, hear every language possible. It's just a wonderful experience. First question.
Okay, hi. I have two questions.
Yes.
I haven't been to the Highline for a while, maybe a decade or so. But it was a fantastic experience just with plants and people. On that trip, I noticed an aronia that was in fruit. And it was just such a surprise because out here you have thrushes and things. It was pigeons. So there was that little shock. And also things like the sassafras, they really had adapted to a very thick leaf. And I was wondering if you noticed some of those, anomalies from adaptation in the city and that environment. So that's one question. The other is, I'm wondering, are you amending like your soils with compost from either the food scraps program in the city, or do you have your own compost?
So I'll answer your second question first. The first question I might need to think about for a moment. But we do add compost to our beds. About every 2 years, we do soil analyses because we're working in between 12 to 24 inches of soil depth at any given point. Even the forested areas of the Highline are about 24 inches of soil depth. And so we really aren't working with much soil. And so we partner with Earth Matter mostly for our compost. And so we are exchanging with them our green debris and getting back compost from them. And I believe that on Governor's Island, they also do food waste as part of that. So we're getting a combination of herbaceous material and food waste compost. And I may need some time to think about your first question, but
Hi, my name is Jenny Woods. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges of growing native plants in what is essentially a big, long container? And, you mentioned the compost, but what sort of irrigation do you use? Do you have to change out plants a lot more? And I ask this as somebody who's tried to do this in my own, like yardlet in Brooklyn, and it's really difficult.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking that. These are the questions I think about every single day when I'm out in the garden. So in my section particularly, I briefly talked about the loss of species diversity, and a lot of that was loss of native plants. A lot of them did not survive in those conditions. And there are 2 beds in my section in particular that did not have irrigation installed. A lot of the park does have in-ground irrigation running through it, but there were 2 beds in my section that did not, and we saw failure of a lot of plants and trees in those sections, obviously. That's a really harsh environment to throw a new planting into. And it is also really difficult to do watering. There was a photo I wanted to add, but we have so many amazing photos of our team. But running hoses across the walkway when you have like tens of thousands of visitors is absolutely difficult. And so this year, actually, in a few weeks, I'm getting irrigation installed into my beds. We're also updating our whole system with moisture sensors so that we can be more adequately and more sustainably watering our beds and measuring how much water we're actually putting in given altering rain conditions. So I think that.
Thank you. I was really impressed. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Are you all open to partnering with local indigenous peoples, whether they're Lenape or, in this area? Are you all open to that? And or have you had any sort of partnerships? Because I did see it's a social impact. And then I heard, and I was very moved by you were saying like, the connection between the horticulturists and the plants themselves, and that work with those local indigenous people is the beginning of that. Are you all open to that?
Absolutely. And at this point, we exist in the operations sector of the Highline organization, and we have a programming division, and very much into community partnerships. And I know that we have had a few partnerships with a few Indigenous folks and people who were residents of the neighborhood before it was gentrified. And so I think that, one, I would love to give you my card and we should continue this conversation because absolutely, we should be. So yes.
Great.
Oh.
Okay, I
Okay.
think we're gonna call
Okay,
it.
thank
I know
you.
We can ask questions all day long, because Shelby's still fascinated. All right, so to finish off this session, we welcome Alexa, sorry about that, Roldos and Victor Azzaretto as they share their work with the growing native plants at Bethpage State Park. Yeah, close to home here. Alexa Roldos, sorry, has worked as a horticulturalist technician at Bethpage State Park since 2021. She has a BS in environmental science and takes a special interest in invasive and native plant species identification and management. Alexa has collected native wildflower seeds and grown them for her home garden and to share with family and friends. Her passion for ecological restoration originates from her experience managing invasive plants near her childhood home, followed by environmental stewardship at a volunteer with New York State Parks, and then at the environmental intern at Comset State Park. Victor Azzaretto has 15 years of experience as a horticulturalist at Bethpage State Park, where he established the expansive nursery operation, mainly growing native wildflowers and grasses from seed. After graduating SUNY Farmingdale with a degree in horticulture, Victor worked in production greenhouse at Planting Fields Arboretum. He later moved to Bethpage State Park, where he started growing native plants that not only beautified the park's garden beds, but also attracted a plethora of wildlife. Please welcome Alexa and Victor.
Thank you very much. Is this the clicker here? Okay. So we're from Bethpage State Park. My name is Victor, this is Alexa. And as you know, Bethpage State Park is a 1,500-acre state park. We're known for 5 golf courses, one of them being the Black Course, which is a world-renowned golf course, which hosts many professional golf tournaments each year. We also have a large picnic area. We have numerous bike trails, a polo field. We're in the news recently as well, but other than that, so today we're going to talk about the grasses of Bethpage, our native grass production, our right-of-way restoration project, our native plant production, and our nature discovery garden, which is our community outreach program. So the grasses of Bethpage. You know, I've been working on the golf course for over 27 years now. And one thing I read, the grasses are the hair of the earth. Now that statement stuck with me through the years being working on a golf course. So I just want to talk about some of the grasses that we have at Bethpage. You know, with these grasses, they enhance the beauty of our golf course, which give us our unique look and add to the resilience of our course. As you can see here, a familiar sight you may have well all known. I know everyone talks about blue stem, and rightfully so, but an underappreciated grass that you may not all know too well is this light tan grass that stands out in the fall, right? So it's a 3 to 5 foot tall clump forming grass, warm season, known as Andropogon virginicus, better known as broom sedge. Okay, so it gets a bad rap for being a prolific seeder. But at Bethpage, we use it for various reasons, for all the highlights. One of them being for one of its most known attributes is its fall and winter, you know, look to it. So during the season, you may not recognize this grass at all. Being a warm season grass, it only starts growing. You might start seeing it growing in June. And by, I'd say, August, the flower stalks start popping up. It's not until September, October, do you notice this beautiful golden tan grass waving in the wind, where it's one of its most beautiful attributes. Now, another reason to grow it is it's drought tolerant. It's food for wildlife. It provides cover for wildlife as well. It's the host plant for one of the skipper Zabulon butterflies. The deer tend not to eat it in flower. The deers might peck at it with the early growth, but not when it's in flower. It helps with erosion control. Let's see. There was also an article about it I read, it was funny, where they actually use extracts from it in some cancer research. So that was pretty interesting. They used it in early times for yellow dye, for making brooms. But for us at Bethpage, we use it for various other reasons. One of them, to add contrast to the golf course. So it highlights the bunkers. So you can see on the left there, immediately you notice the broom sedge right in there, as opposed to no grass in there. So the contrast is immediate look to it. It also shows signs of being allelopathic, which kind of prohibits other things from popping up in there. So it could be a good or bad, depending on your uses of it. We also use it for making natural borders, right? It also creates these beautiful transition zones. These transition zones are areas where the woodland meets the grassland. And these transition zones, various grasses can be grown other than broom sedges. Blue stem dropseed is another common grass for us. But in these areas, you'll find more different types of wildlife growing in these areas than any other, pretty much anywhere else on the golf course. As you can see, so the deal with broom sedge, it's not a very long-lived grass compared to those other native prairie grasses. It lasts about under 10 years, you'll see, but it finally gives way to other longer-lived grasses, such as blue stem. There's some tall blue stem in there on the other side you don't really see. As you can see, the blue stem here. Another great grass that I talked about earlier is dropseed. So dropseed, along with broom sedge and blue stem, they're clump-forming grasses. So in these clump forms, here's a beautiful spot, nice transition zone of all the different grasses. But in these little clump-forming grasses, right, they form these little pockets. And in these pockets, we'll find different perennials growing. So some of these perennials growing pretty interesting. One of them we found, it was actually a pretty rare plant that we found last year. It's Asclepias vertiflora. It's the green comet milkweed, a really uncommon milkweed that you probably may not have ever seen. Obviously, it's being a host plant for the monarchs. It was a great find for us to find that. I guess one of the reasons, it's been there for years because we found a bunch of them, but the reason we haven't really found it is because the flowers are not really special. So you'll walk right by it without even noticing it. Another one we found growing is the tick trefoil. Tick trefoil is great. It's a great pollinator plant, and the foliage is also eaten by different types of skipper butterflies. So it's another great plant. Both these perennials were grown in this field right here. There's another one called Trichostema blue curls, which we found grown as well. I don't have a picture of that though. So the use of these grasses, as you can see in this picture, it highlights our bunker to the left there. It creates borders. It helps with erosion control, right? It creates a scenic pathway. But also in those clump forming grasses, right? In those little pockets, it also forms these little micro habitats. Here you'll find some reindeer lichen here and some different mosses. Now that was in this hillside right here, right in here, you'll find all those growing. So our native grass production, right? So I graduated SUNY Farm, little short story. I graduated SUNY Farmingdale in 2000. You're armed with the knowledge of ornamental trees, shrubs, and perennials that such. So it's early 2000. We had the first US Open come, and they're clearing land, ripping trees down. So here I am growing trees and shrubs, which they really didn't use or need. So, I'm growing all these trees and everyone's looking at me like I'm crazy. So one of the old time golf course guys goes, "Why don't you grow something we can use?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Why don't I grow something we could use?" So weeks go by, and then before that, so some weeks go by and the greenskeeper at that time, he saw some golden brown grasses he saw growing under a right of way. He's like, "Go dig them up, put them on the bunker." So I did that, and instantly, as soon as I did it, people were like, "Oh, wow, that's such a, good look." Why is it a good look? It just looks natural, right? Everyone remarked on how natural the area looked now. So here it was. I found the something to grow plant, right? All these native grasses. Those golden brown grasses were broom sedge and blue stem. So that started the production of all these grasses, and that was 20-something years ago, back in 2003. So long time ago. So how I started, collected those few seeds I had, started growing hundreds, uh, turned into thousands. So the process is still the same. We go out in the field. Mind you, this was not all here 20 something years ago, but nowadays, same process. We go out in the field late fall, collect some seed. As you can see, there's me and Alexa collecting seed. Now, the one on the left is blue stem, obviously, and the one on the right is broom sedge. It's in these plastic bags, but that was just for a temporary job we did. Normally, we keep it in these brown paper bags. I wouldn't recommend to keep it in black plastic. It will get moldy very quick. That was just for holding it a long period of time. But broom sedge is rather hard to get the seed out. So blue stem is rather easy. You can just, strip it rather quickly. But broom sedge, it's rolled in these in the stalks. So it's kind of hard. How we originally did, we would thrash out these stalks in garbage cans, and it would be so much debris. It was very time consuming getting the seed out. So what we did, we developed this little contraption here. We just took some old pallets, made it an area where we could throw the stalks in, and there's a grate on the bottom where the seeds fall through. So we put the stalks in there and just turn around with a pitchfork, take a little hand blower and shoot it through, and all the seeds fall down. A real easy way to get broom sedge seed. If anyone wants to start growing broom sedge, it's a real easy way. So what do, right? I have a couple of greenhouses. We start them in the greenhouse for even germination, okay? So here you can see we start them in plug trays in here. We got like 100 plug trays of blue stem, broom sedge. We grow drop seed, poverty oakgrass, on the occasion, Indian grass, big blue stem switchgrass, on the occasion with those. Okay, so we start the grasses. That's in, I'd say, mid-May. It takes about 2 weeks to germinate. We grow them on for another 4 weeks. So at that point, as you can see, we get a group of volunteers, and then we start transplanting them into 1 to 2 gallon containers based upon what variety we're growing. So the mix we use here is divot mix. Divot mix is the mix we use on the golf course for the tees. It's mostly 65% sand, 35% soil. So people, when you go buy native grasses, you find it growing in grow mix, okay, which is mostly peat moss and stuff like that. But long-term grow in containers of these grasses do not work. You'll get a big plant, but let's just say you go transplant into the field, it kind of crumbles in a season because it's growing in that organic soil. These grasses like lean soil, right? These grasses are indicator of poor soils, rocky soils, and that such. So you got to be careful where you grow them in long term. It also helps for the when you go to plant them, it's used to the sandy soil. So as you can see, they're transplanted into these 1 gallon, 2 gallon containers. This mat holds 9,000 grasses. So every year for the last 20 something years, I've been growing 5,000 to 9,000 grasses every year. So way over 100,000 grasses I produced through the seasons. So as you can see, they're pretty much finished transplanted by the end of June into July. And by that September, this is what you get. So in that 3 short month period, we can produce a big clump of grass, as you can see here. Reason being, if you did it in the field, you might not get them to flower the first season. We're putting a bunch of seed in a little plug tray, and I kind of give it a little juice, not much through the season, just to get it going. Okay, here's some examples of some drop seed that we grow. Okay, so after they're grown in the fall, they're put into carts and we ship them out to the various places on the golf course. Here you can see this area is a newly sodded area, and we're going to plug it with these grasses in here. This is a sodded area here you could see we just plugged it up on the black course here. So another cheap, easy way if you want to get broom sedge in an area, this whole hillside was filled with invasives. You name it, buckthorn, mugwort, multiflora rose, bittersweet, all the usuals was in this. Like there was some crappy trees in there as well. So they cleared this whole area, and it actually got dozed, right? So now it's all bare soil. And they're like, what do you want to do with it? And I was like, I didn't want to do anything. But the first thing I said, let's just make it a grassland. So we took broom sedge. This is late winter. We grabbed all these stalks. We laid stalks everywhere on here, right? This is broom sedge and blue stem seed we still found late winter. And we drag it in with the drag mats. So within 2 seasons, it was like this. So this is actually the third season. You could see it's filled within 3 seasons. In the second season, it was filled as well. But this is 3 seasons in. So a pretty cheap, easy way to get this grass established by just taking some stalks, throwing them in an area and dragging it in. So knowing that that works so well led us into our next project, which is our right-of-way restoration, right? So there's a right-of-way adjacent to one of our pollinator gardens on the red course. And it was filled with invasives, just like a lot of other right-of-ways. It was, I saw it all the time and I was like, man, I want to clear this area out and make it a grassland restoration. That was like 15 years ago, I had that idea. So as you can see, here's what it looked like. It looked terrible. And this was last July. As you could see, there was nothing but, crap growing in there, full with invasives. So, and then what happened was PSE&G would come every other year, butcher the trees, and it even enhanced the terrible look of it. So it was god awful. So I was like, I got to do something. So finally, we got a contact from PSE&G, and I told them the idea. I was like, if you guys clear it out, I'll seed it and plant it, okay? So the right-of-way is 2,000 feet long. It's in our park, and it's divided into 2 sections. So there's 1,000-foot. This is the north field. It's 1,000 feet, and then there's a little crosswalk, and there's another 1,000 feet. So they cleared this area out, as you can see. Within a week, so they didn't think I was crazy. I invited them down to the park, showed them our plant production, showed them our grass production operation, and then they're like, okay, we'll do it. So the next week, they came with the Bobcat, and that thing was eating everything in sight. They cleared out this whole area right down to the ground for us, as you can see here. So the first step we did with those bags of grass seed we had in the little greenhouse in those plastic bags, we seeded this whole area with some community service groups, some volunteers. Actually, these people were from PSE&G. They came back down to help us seed it. So we threw stalks everywhere and then dragged it again. Then what I did is I tilled 2 rows on either side of the path, right? So each path, it's a long ass path right here, and we filled it with 2,000 perennials. It's over 70 different species. That was in May of 2023. So this project just started, if you could see back here in the winter. So February, March is when this project started, just of last year. We planted it with volunteer groups, came back. We got another group of volunteers to come. We mulched it just for the season, just to give it a chance so some more of these invasives didn't pop up. Then, as you can see, by August, boom, look at this. Liatris, Rudbeckias, penstemons, the whole list of perennials popped up successfully. We had a nice wet season. All the plants did very well. And then is August. Here's a picture of the grass is starting to pop up, right? So now all the other invasives that were in here, the mugwort and other stuff, now there's competition. And I mentioned before, broom sedge being allelopathic, right? So it's prohibiting some of these weed seeds from germinating in there, which is fine. That's what we wanted. So it's perfect in there. So that's September. Look at this. It's a beautiful area. The first thing, what did we start noticing? More insects, more biodiversity, more different birds, hummingbirds, different types of bees and whatnot. Really interesting. That was just in one season, right? So by November of 2023, look what we did. We took that crappy looking area and we restored it to a native grassland area filled with perennials in one season of time. This is just from, this winter. So pretty successful with that operation in the right of way. So the other area, the south side down this way here, didn't have as many invasive plants. So we just kind of monitored what popped up. There were some asters and goldenrods and the usual. There were some trefoils as well. So what we did is, you can see in here, there's a whole mix. There's mugwort obviously in there. So what we did, we overseeded it with some ironweed and different goldenrods and, large perennials, Rudbeckias, eupatoriums, things that are going to compete well. And then when it was cut down in that fall, we seeded it with blue stem and broom sedge and dragged it in again, right? So that was that. So after that, we were pretty successful. PSE&G, they liked the other area so much, they called us and like, oh, we want to do more projects with you guys. And I said, that's fantastic. So next year, we'll see what happens with the south side, and we'll give you an update on that. But now it's going to talk about native plant production. I'm going to let Alexa talk a little about that for now, and I'll be back.
Thank you. Where's the other thing? Thank you. Hi, thank you. So native plant production at Bethpage started originally for planting of natives as showcase gardens throughout the park. In recent years, we've been able to expand our operation to grow more diversity of plants in higher quality to share with other parks in the region, as well as local municipalities. We work out of 2 heated greenhouses, as Victor showed you with the grasses earlier. And we have outdoor nursery areas as well. So this gives us a couple of different options as to how we can grow these plants. We have inside, it's like a propagation chamber, we call it, where we can sow the seeds in shallow kind of trays with heat mats on the bottom and timed lights and ventilation, and it all closes up so that nothing can get into it from the greenhouse. Usually we have some pests that get in there and like to eat our seeds. So that's one way we can do seeds that are don't need as much stratification. And then outside, we have this large germinator, we call it. It's basically just a raised bed with about 6 inches of soil. It's 18 feet long by 3 feet wide. We can fit about 50 varieties of seeds in there. It has these mesh covers, which again, protect it from pests that could get to the seeds, but also allows for the weather to get into the seeds and for the natural stratification to happen. So the weather breaks down that seed coat and goes through the thawing and freezing. And we end up with a lot of nice seedlings by May with little work from us. Another way, when we run out of space in the germinator, we have more trays that we cover with these mesh covers that we built with scrap wood as well. And this gives us the option of also bringing those inside to pop those a little bit earlier if we wanted to. And then once those are big enough, we transplant them into different size containers. And then they live on our nursery, greenhouse mat nursery, where they grow out until the fall, where we plant them. Usually a lot of the plants that we grow are ready to plant in the fall. Here's an example of one that we did in our red garden. We plant pretty close together just to try to combat the amount of weeds that go in between the garden. So once this is established, we can propagate these plants again from the ones that we grow by collecting the seed. An important thing to note when you collect seed is that you want to collect the seed, go through the gardens throughout the seasons and see what's ripe when. As you can see, different things are ripe at different times of the year. That wild senna, you can tell, is not ready because it's still green, while the prairie ironweed is probably ready, and you want to get to that before the wind takes it away or the birds eat the seeds. This is how I keep track of the seeds. We have over 250 grasses, trees, and shrubs that we have grown at one time. So I keep track of where they are, where they're planted, or where they exist, and when we collect them to create a calendar of keep track of how we can collect our seed. This is a seed cleaning process. I bring them in paper bags, like Victor said, just because to avoid mold and to let any insects that are existing in the seed heads to escape in the greenhouse. And then you clean them further through sets of screens where you, clean them as much as you can. For our purposes, they're pretty clean, but not, some chaff is left over, especially with things like echinacea and stuff. And then you put them in labeled envelopes, and then they're nice and organized and easy to share. One of my favorite things is sharing seeds with people. And I was able to create a community seed library at Bethpage State Park, where we give out, thank you. So this is at the clubhouse. We put it out in the fall and winter when I have the seeds available, and I've been able to give out hundreds of seed packets to park patrons. And it's also got some information at the bottom about the benefits of native plants. And another way we really like to advocate for these plants is not only giving away seeds, but showcasing these plants in our gardens. And Victor's going to talk about the garden.
So like Alexis said, we grow thousands of plants. So where to put them all, right? So at Bethpage years ago, I started trying to incorporate these perennials on the golf course. But being a public golf course who they have golf carts is not a good mix for the perennials in the rough. So I had to start developing gardens on each course for these plants to exist, for the insects to thrive, for the birds to exist, to create habitat for these plants to flourish. So the first one I did was in 2000. It was on the black course. This used to be a garbage dump for many years. It slowly got converted into an area with different viburnums, clethra, and there's an assortment of different perennials, eupatoriums, rudbeckias, and the whole list of, what we grow. So this is just one of the gardens on the black. This is on the green course. It's about an acre long. It consists of different rows, and in these rows is all different perennials. Here's a nice fall color of some winged sumac. There's some winged sumac and stuff. This is still the green course, so you could see by the end of the season it fills in beautifully. On the red course, you could see this here was the right of way. That's why I seen this area the whole time. This garden, this is a great plant. If no one knows it, it's Thermopsis carolinea. It's not native to Long Island, but from down south a little. Still a fantastic native perennial, blooms in June. You see, June, look how tall it is. It's 5 to 6 feet tall by June. When you want a standout plant in early season, this is your plant. It's a great pollinator. You're going to see bees go to it all over the place. Not really that vigorous, but it does take drought tolerant. This is in an area where it's not really irrigated at all. July, big swath of liatris, the rudbeckias. But I just wanted to show you the same picture, same area, just the concession of bloom. So all these gardens, one thing, it's the succession of blooms, right? You need something interesting all season long. So another one was this blue on the blue course, the blue U. So I just ripped out this piece of sod just to see if it worked. There's no irrigation whatsoever over here. So I just ripped out a sod with the sod cutter and let's see, I'm just going to load this area with perennials, not do nothing and see what happens, right? So I made a little area and boom, you see, and this is many years later, but you could still see it thriving, gets no irrigation, no maintenance whatsoever, pollinators galore, and you could see it's right along the side of the golf course. So with all these gardens we have, we saw the results, me and other people, golfers, we saw, sorry. So one thing I'll quickly say, the picnic garden was a great success there, as you can see. But one plant, I just want to say one plant. This is Pygnanthia muticum, a fantastic pollinator plant. I would recommend this plant. If you want to attract different pollinator species, this is the plant you want to do. Also, we did a kids garden. We wanted to get the kids involved. There was an elementary school adjacent to the park, so we wanted to get the kids involved. There was a corridor loaded with invasives. We went in there again and said, let's clean this out and make a pollinator garden. Boom, boom, boom. We planted it up. And as you can see, we planted with another group. This is June. By that spring, the kids came. The garden was full of all different perennials, another like 100 species in this garden. This QR code lists all the different species in there. You can see it in there if you can get it. But then the kids came, right? We gave them quick tours. We showed them host plants, different seeds, different ways to ID plants and stuff like that. They really loved it. One of the girls said it was her favorite place, right? So we were really happy. We made this outdoor classroom for them, which ultimately happened. So one day, just one last thing. I was dumping some wood chips in this area, right? We gave them the key so they can use the garden when they want to come. I didn't know they were going to be there. The kids were there and they were excited when they saw me and they came running up to me and they wanted to show me the milkweed bug, right? And once they told me about the milkweed bug, I was like, wow, it really worked because we turned these kids on and they were showing me stuff in the garden. And it was really impressive. So years later, one of the morals of the story from Richie, who told me years ago, why don't you grow something we can use? And it stuck with me all that time, growing something we could use. So I want to thank you. If you have any questions and stuff. Great.
Session, and how wonderful to be able to share. We've got a few questions left for both of these guys, so please, what are your questions?
Hi, thank you. That was a really fantastic presentation, Victor and Alexa. But I would like to ask you a little bit about the area where you have mugwort. You
Mhm.
said you threw some seeds down and then what, could you just go over that one
That's
more time?
actually a great question because mugwort is one of the killer weeds, right? It's a top 5 invasive weeds. So you have an area of mugwort, mechanical, getting rid of it mechanically, great. But so by cutting it and overseeding it, so that area, that right away still has mugwort coming up through the seasons, right? But we cut it for the first season until that grass gets established. And then you'll start noticing it's going to take years. There's always going to be invasives in that area. It's just the amount of invasives, if you can handle that amount. Mugwort will still make the appearance, but we keep it cut like a couple of more times, let the grasses, encourage the grasses more, and hopefully it won't kill it, but it'll lessen it.
So when you say you cut it, you're just mowing
We
the
cut
top?
it, yeah,
just the
so
top.
during the season, because broom sedge flowers late in the season, okay? So it's not a cool season grass, mugwort being cool season, you can cut mugwort down up until like, late July, right? Then you stop cutting the field, and then the native grasses take over. So if you cut May, June, if it's a heavy weeded area, I would say cut it May, cut it June, cut it the first couple of weeks of July, then stop cutting it, and then let those grasses take over. But you have to get a good seed bank of grasses in that area. So but it's still a challenge. You will fight mugwort forever. Okay, great. Oh, sure, whatever.
Karen Bloomer. I grew up in Farmingdale, and so I spent a lot of time at Bethpage State
That's
Park.
right. I saw you many years ago, Karen, I remember.
And I was wondering, you're doing mostly herbaceous, other than the winged sumac. At that time, I don't know what it's like now, but there were little fields and shoulders of low bush blueberry where we would all go out and pick blueberries. So I'm wondering, is that still there, or are you doing anything kind of like a historical touchstone for what was originally there?
Right. We still have areas of low bush blueberry and huckleberry. We don't grow blueberry or huckleberry at this point, but eventually we're hoping. Like you said, we're primarily growing herbaceous perennials, not really any woodies, but the areas where there's still blueberries and huckleberries, we're just enhancing. So I'd love to have you come down again and see you soon, though. Thank you very much. I saw her 20-something years ago. I know.